In this episode, we're going to focus on a simple truth that drives a lot of real cloud security outcomes. Encryption can be everywhere, but if key usage is loosely controlled, the protection can still fail in quiet, avoidable ways. Keys are powerful because they can unlock sensitive data, and that makes them a tempting target for attackers and a common source of accidental exposure for teams. Key misuse does not always look like a dramatic breach, because it can be as subtle as an overly broad permission that allows decryption outside the intended workflow. It can also show up as a rushed troubleshooting change that grants a temporary exception and then quietly becomes permanent. Preventing misuse is about building guardrails that make the safe path easy and the unsafe path hard, even when people are busy or under pressure. The best approach combines three ideas that reinforce each other: strict permissions, clear separation of responsibilities, and a careful key lifecycle that prevents old access from lingering. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good starting point is being clear about what key misuse means, because beginners often imagine misuse only as theft of key material, when misuse is usually about legitimate systems being used in illegitimate ways. In a cloud environment, keys are often protected well at the storage level, but the platform still allows authorized identities to request encryption or decryption operations. If the wrong identity can request decryption, the key has been misused even if nobody extracted the key. This is why the most important question is often not where the key is stored, but who can invoke it and under what conditions. Misuse also includes policy changes that widen access, like granting additional roles decrypt capability without understanding the consequences. Another form of misuse is using the same key across too many contexts, so that one compromised identity can unlock unrelated datasets. Once you define misuse as unauthorized outcomes produced through authorized interfaces, the prevention strategy becomes much clearer and more practical. Permissions are the first line of defense because permissions decide which identities can cause key operations to happen at all. In most cloud settings, you use a key management system, KMS, to define who can create keys, who can manage key policy, and who can use keys for encrypt and decrypt actions. A common beginner mistake is treating key permissions like normal application permissions, where broad access feels like it reduces friction, but key permissions are closer to master access for data protection. Strong permissions mean that decrypt capability is rare, tightly scoped, and tied to specific application identities that have clear business justification. Strong permissions also mean avoiding direct grants to individual people whenever possible, because direct grants are easy to forget and hard to review later. Instead, permissions should map to roles that reflect real workflows, so that when a workflow changes, you adjust the role rather than chasing scattered grants. The goal is to make key usage an intentional design decision, not an accidental side effect of being in a large admin group. Precision in permissions matters because overly broad rules often look reasonable in the moment but create wide blast radius later. If a role can decrypt any data protected by a set of keys, then compromising any identity with that role becomes a shortcut to broad data access. A safer approach is to scope permissions to specific keys, specific resources, and specific operations, so that one identity can do only what it must do and nothing more. This also helps prevent accidental misuse, like a developer tool using a production key, because permissions do not clearly separate environments. Precision also includes limiting who can change key policy, because policy changes can silently turn a safe system into an unsafe one. If many administrators can edit key rules, then mistakes and abuse become more likely and more difficult to attribute. A practical way to think about it is that decryption is a high-impact action and policy change is a high-leverage action, so both deserve stricter gates than ordinary operations. When permissions are precise, misuse becomes harder to achieve and easier to detect. Separation is the second pillar, and it is about dividing responsibilities so no single identity or team can quietly create, expand, and exploit key power without oversight. Separation begins with the difference between key administrators and key users, because key administration includes changing the rules of access, while key usage is the day-to-day act of encrypting and decrypting data. If the same people who use the key can also change the key's policy, they can grant themselves broader decrypt power and then use it, which is a classic path for abuse. Separation also applies across teams, because the team that owns sensitive data should not automatically own the keys that protect it without any checks and balances. In well-governed environments, a central security or platform team might manage key policy standards, while application teams use keys through controlled roles. This is not about blocking work, but about preventing conflicts of interest and reducing the impact of a single compromised account. When separation is strong, misuse requires collusion or multiple compromises, which raises the bar for attackers and reduces the chance of silent abuse. Separation also needs to exist across environments and trust zones, because development and testing are usually less controlled than production in real organizations. If development identities can use production keys, then a compromise in a lower environment can lead directly to access to high-value data. This is why separating keys by environment is such a powerful control, because it turns a single mistake into a contained problem instead of a cross-environment disaster. Separation by environment also supports safer operations, because teams can rotate and test keys in lower environments without risking production outages. Another important separation is between different data domains, such as customer data versus internal operational data, because the sensitivity and access needs are different. If one key protects many unrelated datasets, you lose the ability to apply different policies and you increase blast radius. Strong separation means keys and permissions reflect real boundaries in the organization, not the convenience of reusing one key everywhere. A commonplace separation breaks down is in overpowered administrator roles, where a single cloud admin group ends up with broad access to storage, identity, networking, and keys. Beginners often assume that administrators need universal access to keep systems running, but universal access is exactly what makes a compromise so dangerous. Strong separation limits which administrators can touch key policy and makes key administration a specialized capability with extra protections. It also limits when key admin access is used, because administration should be rare and purposeful, not a casual part of everyday operations. This makes administrative activity easier to monitor and easier to audit, because key policy changes stand out rather than blending into constant background activity. Separation also includes having different identities for different tasks, so a person can do routine work with a lower privilege identity and only elevate into a key admin role when needed. That approach reduces standing privilege, which reduces both misuse risk and the attractiveness of a single stolen credential. When administrative separation is practiced consistently, it becomes one of the strongest barriers against key misuse. The third pillar is careful key lifecycle management, because keys and key permissions can become liabilities when they outlive their original purpose. Key lifecycle includes creation, activation, usage, rotation, and retirement, and each stage introduces its own misuse risks if it is handled casually. At creation time, risk appears when keys are created without clear purpose, ownership, or documented policy, because undocumented keys tend to accumulate and become difficult to manage. During active usage, risk appears when permissions expand over time and nobody reviews them, leading to slow permission creep. During rotation, risk appears when teams avoid rotation because it might break systems, which leads to long-lived keys that become stable targets. During retirement, risk appears when old keys remain usable even though the data no longer needs them, or when old permissions remain attached to groups long after the original project ended. A careful lifecycle prevents old access from lingering and ensures that key decisions remain current, explainable, and defensible. Lifecycle discipline is how you prevent yesterday's emergency choices from becoming tomorrow's chronic risk. Rotation deserves special attention because it is both a security control and an operational challenge, and the way you handle it strongly influences misuse risk. Rotating keys reduces the time window during which any single key can be abused, and it reduces the long-term value of a compromised key. However, Rotation must be planned so it does not cause outages that pressure teams into disabling security features or granting broad exceptions. A careful approach includes knowing which systems depend on which keys, so you can rotate confidently and validate outcomes without guesswork. It also includes ensuring that rotation is not a rare, terrifying event, because rare events are where mistakes and shortcuts happen. When rotation becomes routine, the organization develops muscle memory for updating dependencies, validating encryption behavior, and monitoring for anomalies. This operational maturity directly reduces misuse risk because it keeps key changes controlled and prevents the buildup of stale, overly trusted keys. A key lifecycle that includes safe, repeatable rotation is one of the clearest signals of a mature key program. Retirement and decommissioning are equally important for preventing misuse, because old keys and old permissions are common hiding places for unnoticed risk. A key that is no longer needed should not remain fully usable, especially if it protects data that is archived or rarely accessed. Attackers often target neglected systems because they are less monitored, and old keys tied to old projects can provide surprising access paths. Careful retirement means knowing when data no longer needs to be decrypted, ensuring the key's status changes appropriately, and verifying that no unexpected workflows still rely on it. It also means removing key permissions from roles that no longer need them, because keeping permissions around just in case is a recipe for future misuse. Retirement should be accompanied by clear documentation and evidence, so auditors and investigators can see that key power was intentionally reduced, not accidentally lost. When retirement is disciplined, your environment becomes less cluttered with latent decryption power, which reduces the number of places an attacker can succeed. Preventing misuse also requires connecting key controls to identity governance, because keys are controlled through who has access, not through what the policy claims in isolation. Identity and access management, IAM. Hygiene is the foundation that makes key permissions meaningful, because if identity groups are messy or memberships are not reviewed, key policies become unreliable. A careful program treats key-related roles as high sensitivity and ensures membership changes are approved, time-bounded when appropriate, and reviewed regularly. Reviews should not be paperwork exercises. They should result in removals when access is no longer justified, because permission creep is one of the most common long-term risks. It also helps to avoid direct individual assignments and instead use well-defined groups that represent job functions, because groups are easier to review and explain. Another important part of governance is requiring strong authentication for identities that can use or administer keys, because key power is too valuable to protect with weak login practices. When identity governance is tight, key boundaries hold, and when identity governance is loose, key boundaries become a myth. Monitoring is the practical backstop that helps you spot misuse and prove that permissions and separation are working as intended. A strong monitoring approach focuses on key usage and key administration events, because those are the high-value actions that define whether key power is being exercised appropriately. You want to notice patterns like unusual spikes in decrypt operations, key usage by unexpected identities, or policy changes occurring outside plan windows. Monitoring also supports lifecycle discipline because it helps validate that rotation and retirement behaved as expected rather than assuming they did. Evidence matters because in real scrutiny, someone will ask how you know keys were not misused, and the strongest answer involves logs that show who used keys and when, plus policies that show who could have used them. Monitoring becomes much easier when permissions are precise and separation is strong, because normal usage becomes narrow and predictable, making anomalies stand out. When monitoring is treated as part of key design rather than as an optional add-on, misuse becomes harder to hide and easier to contain. It is also important to recognize common beginner misunderstandings that lead to misuse even when teams believe they are being careful. One misunderstanding is thinking that encryption automatically protects data regardless of who can decrypt, when in reality decryption permission is the most direct path to exposure. Another misunderstanding is assuming that using AKMS means keys are safe by default, even if key policies allow broad access and key administrators are too numerous. A third misunderstanding is believing that separation is only about compliance, when separation is actually a practical way to reduce the impact of compromise and prevent quiet privilege expansion. Beginners also sometimes treat lifecycle as optional housekeeping rather than a security control, which leads to keys and permissions that outlive their purpose. These misunderstandings tend to produce the same outcome: a key system that looks secure in diagrams but behaves insecurely in day-to-day operations. Preventing misuse is largely about replacing those assumptions with disciplined controls that match how cloud environments and people actually behave. When you pull these pillars together, you get a cohesive prevention strategy that is stronger than any single setting or feature. Permissions define exactly which identities can use keys, and they do so with precision so that decrypt capability is narrow and explainable. Separation ensures that no single identity can both expand key power and exploit it without oversight, and it keeps environments and data domains from sharing trust in dangerous ways. Lifecycle discipline keeps key power current by rotating keys safely, retiring keys and permissions when they are no longer needed, and preventing old access paths from lingering unnoticed. Identity governance makes the whole system real by keeping roles clean, memberships reviewed, and authentication strong for key-capable identities. Monitoring and evidence provide the visibility needed to detect misuse and to prove that controls are working over time. This is how you prevent key misuse without relying on hope, and it is also how you reason through exam questions that test whether you understand the difference between encryption that exists and encryption that is actually protective. The end goal is a key program that remains strong even when people are busy, systems are changing, and attackers are looking for the easiest path to valuable outcomes.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.